I literally cried while reading the final gambit. That was just too much for my little pea brain to handle. Love you, Mia. One of those tropes that's not for me. And I slightly will judge you if it's one that you enjoy. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Hi, hello, how are you? How has your week been? I cannot believe how quickly we are approaching the end of 2024. This year has definitely been a wild ride for me personally, but it's also been a great year for reading. So let us do some reflection on the highs and lows of my reading journey this year by answering some bookish questions. All of these questions that I'm going to be answering I got from Sarah Caroli's 2024 end of year book tag. So I will link that video down below, but I will also put all of the questions that I am answering down in the description below if you want to make your own book tag, which I definitely think you should. It's super fun to look back and see not only what were your favorite books of the year, but also which books were the most surprising, which books were the most disappointing. It's just fun to look back at all of the different aspects of your reading journey. Let's get into it. The first question is a book you wish you could erase from your memory and read again. There simply is no other answer for this question for me than The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This series is literally everything that I want in a mystery. I have always loved like books and movies that have puzzles in them. One of my favorite movies of all time is Now You See Me, which is entirely about figuring out how a group of magicians do their tricks. I love Knives Out, which is essentially just the exact same plot as The Inheritance Games. So it's no surprise that like this series is one of my favorites that I've read all year. I literally cried while reading the final gambit, which doesn't make any sense because there's nothing sad at all about the book. I was just so overwhelmed with emotion thinking about how much time and effort Jennifer Lynn Barnes had to have put into planning out these books and linking all of these things back together to have the very first page of the first book link to the very last page of the last book. And that was just too much for my little pea brain to handle that I had to cry about it on the plane in front of a bunch of strangers. This is one of those books that made me question if I was ever going to like another book ever again. That question is still up for debate. All that being said, I would definitely love the opportunity to read this series again for the first time. New favorite character. This is gonna sound a little stupid, I feel, and I honestly kind of forgot that I started this series this year because I haven't read any of the books in like several months. But my new favorite character from this year is none other than the icon herself, Mia Thermopolis from The Princess Diaries. I read the first book in this series back in I think March, and oh my gosh, this series is just absolutely hilarious, and Mia herself is hilarious because I feel like I relate a lot to her when I was in like middle school and early high school because she is the most drama. She is so dramatic about every little thing in her life. Anytime she has one tiny little inconvenience, it's like the world is ending. And it's just funny to read this book and think about like, wow, I literally was exactly like this in middle school. And I was one of those people that thought that my little middle school problems were the biggest problem, the toughest thing I was ever going to face in my entire life. It's just like funny to read that and be like, yeah, that actually is how I was when I was younger. But also she is so quippy and has the most hilarious inner monologue that I have ever read. You know, because it is written in a diary format, you are very privy to Mia's every thought. So much of what is written in the book is entirely of her inner monologue and stuff you would never actually say out loud to another person. That just makes it all the more funny, knowing that every person is walking around with these kind of thoughts in their head but doesn't actually say them out loud. So knowing the inner workings of Mia's mind is just, it makes her all that much more enjoyable. Love you, Mia. Most surprising book, good or bad? For me, A Court of Wings and Ruin, the third book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas, was the most surprising in a good way. Whenever you hear people talking about ACOTAR, they love the second book. Like unanimously, the second book, A Court of Mist and Fury, is like people's favorite from this series. And so when I read the series and I thought, oh, like, okay, like I thought that that was where the series was gonna peak. No. Then I read A Court of Wings and Ruin. I'm not entirely sure what it is about that one that made me like it so much more than A Court of Mist and Fury, but I loved ACOWAR so much. Like, when I tell you a book has never made me sob like ACOWAR did, like, I'm not kidding. I actually have a reading vlog on my channel, and I swear like 5 minutes of it is just me sobbing, crying at the last 50 pages of this book. But I was just not expecting that, like, at all. So this book was definitely the most surprising in a good way. Now, I don't want to like spend too much time talking about a book that I didn't like, but the book that was most surprising to me in a bad way was Forcing Fate by M.A. Frick. I was really hoping that I was going to enjoy this one. It was sold to me as a Fourth Wing knockoff, and I really enjoyed Fourth Wing. One of my like really good friends read this book and it really enjoyed it. She rated it at 4 stars, I think. And she also really enjoyed Fourth Wing. And so I was like, oh, okay, like that sounds fun. Like, I'd love to read it. And so I did. And I hated it. This ended up being a slow burn bully romance. Don't try to come at me with a bully romance, because I will never buy it. Never. One of those tropes that's not for me. And I slightly will judge you if it's one that you enjoy. Best and most disappointing new release for this year. Let's say the most disappointing first, because I kind of want to end with the best one. I want the happy things to come last. Okay, the most disappointing new release that I read this year was, while this book didn't technically come out this year, it came out December 26th of last year, and I feel like that is technically this year. But I wasn't really like disappointed with any of the books that I read that came out this year, so we're just gonna go with this one because I make the rules. But it is Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. It just wasn't what I was expecting. This duology doesn't exactly follow the same structure that most fantasy series do. Most fantasy series establish the world building first and then kind of get more into the plot and the romance. But this book goes a lot into the romance in the first book, and then the second book goes into the world building. And that's just like not what I was anticipating. I didn't particularly enjoy it being done that way because the couple are together a lot more in the first book than they are in the second book. Like, they're together in the second book for like a grand total of like 20 minutes. I am the type of person that as the series goes on, I will want to see the couple together more and more. And so for us to kind of like backtrack on that was just like not something I particularly enjoyed. And like, especially if you're gonna market your book as a romantasy, like I actually want to see the romance. Like, don't market it as a romantasy and then like have them like not really be together for most of the book. But for the best new release this year, I simply couldn't pick one. And once again, I get to make the rules, so I can have more than one if I want. The first one was definitely Funny Story by Emily Henry. I am a firm believer that every girl can relate to one of Emily Henry's female main characters. Poppy, Nora, January, Harriet, and Daphne, and I am 100% a Daphne girl. Like, I have never in my life related to a book character more than I have Daphne. Like, if anyone in my real life wants to understand the things that I think in my head but don't say out loud, like, go read this book.
Or don't.
And then also Powerful by Lauren Roberts. This book takes place at the same time as Powerless. They're happening simultaneously. That means that you know the ending of Powerful before you even read it. And I was under the impression that that would make it easier to read. It did not. It somehow made it all the more gut-wrenching to read. And I don't know how she did it, but somehow in the span of like 180 pages, Lauren Roberts made me care so much about these two characters, and I just simply don't know how she did it. I loved it. I sobbed. And I made the mistake of reading the end of this book in front of my grandmother, who already thinks I read too many books. And so then when she sees me sitting in the corner of the room crying my eyes out to a book, she's like, then even more worried about my sanity. And I'm like, I guess you kind of have a valid reason to like wonder if I'm okay. Next time I'll make sure to hide when I read the end of a book like that. The longest and the shortest book that you read. I feel like I've kind of glossed over the longest book that I read this year. I don't think I even realized it was the longest book that I read this year until I was doing this video, because I read it on my Kindle, and for some reason, whenever I read books on my Kindle, I just like am never aware of like how many pages are in the book. But it's Breaking Dawn, the fourth and final book in the Twilight series by Stephanie Meyer. That book is just like a train wreck that you can't look away from. I somehow managed to make it out of my adolescent years without ever having watched or read Twilight, and I honestly think I'm better off for it. But that book is 756 pages long. That's way too long. Like, way too long. But I couldn't stop reading it. The shortest book that I read this year, this is a book that my mother told me to read to tell me that I don't do well with change. That's rude. I think this book was like 96 pages long. All right then. Most emotional book. This book, for me, I didn't cry the most at, because if we went strictly by that criteria, it would have to be A Court of Wings and Ruin. But I don't think that that book is necessarily the most emotional book that I read. I'm kind of going by the book that evoked the most emotion in me, which has to be none other than Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. The main character of the book, Angel, has lived a very hard life, and I just found myself so often thinking while reading the book that yes, this book is historical fiction, but there are so many people out there who live lives that are as hard as hers, if not harder. And that was just something I couldn't stop thinking about throughout the book. And I think a lot of times I do like forget how privileged I am in my life. Reading this book and reading about Angel's life and like knowing that that is reality for a lot of people was just kind of eye-opening for me. And so like I ended up crying in the first 10 pages of this book, which I feel like is a feat. Now on the opposite end of the spectrum, the happiest book that I read in 2024. I had to go past one book, but definitely the Sweater Weather series. I have not talked about this series enough, but it is an interconnected standalone series of 7 small town fall books, and each one kind of focuses on a different like romance trope. But as I was trying to pick a book for this question, I realized that like most of the books that I read, like the characters are not really very happy. What does that say about me? Probably nothing good. All of the books in the Sweater Weather series are clean romance books, which is fun because this year in my reading journey, I kind of decided that I no longer want to read like open door romances, and it can kind of be a little bit difficult to find clean romance books. An easy 7-book series to read. I still have 4 more of them to read. Maybe I'll save those for next fall. The best series that I read in 2024. There really was only one option for this question, because despite the fact that as of the time that I'm filming this, I read 108 books this year, but I only finished 2 series, and one of them I didn't really like. So by default, the best series that I read this year was the River of Time series by Lisa T. Berggren. One of the reasons it was super fun to read this series this year was because the books take place in 14th century Italy, and at the beginning of the summer, I got the opportunity to go to Italy with my mom. It was fun to read these books that were taking place in Italy and then going to Italy and being like, oh my gosh, like they talked about this in the book. So that was really fun. Besides that, this series is so good. It's fun because it mixes 21st century ideologies and knowledges with like living in 14th century Italy. And like, okay, yes, this series is outlandish, and in reality, if people were transported back into 14th century Italy from the 21st century, they probably would not be as successful in life as these people were. But it is fiction, okay? Like, it doesn't have to be realistic. We're talking about time travel here. The prettiest cover that I read this year was 100% my illustrated copy of The Prisoner of Azkaban from the Harry Potter series. Like, I don't know what it is, but this cover to me is just like the prettiest thing. I love like this particular shade of purple, and something about it like with the green like just pops off the page. I just love it. Like, look at Ernie in the window here. Like, he's just so funny looking. But yeah, This is my favorite cover I read. Book with new favorite quotes. Once again, I have to say, funny story. I've never related more to a book character than I did Daphne. Tell me that this quote is not like the most gut-wrenching thing you've ever read. I don't know how to talk along the surface of things, but I also don't want to unearth the ugly stuff over and over again for people who are just passing through my life. It's depleting. Like every time I dole out a kernel of my history to someone who's not going to become a fixture in my life, a piece of me gets carried away somewhere I can never get it back. Like, are you kidding? I was never the one just having fun. I was the one anticipating consequences. That's definitely something I realized about myself, like in college, especially like my freshman year. I had such a big friend group. I have so many friends, like I love them, but they are somehow able to just go do things without thinking about the worst case scenario. I'm going and doing these things with them and I'm trying to have fun, but I can't keep my thoughts from spiraling in the opposite direction. It ends up taking away from the enjoyment of it. Like I just feel so seen by this book. So many decisions I made were based on the fear of what could go wrong instead of my hopes for what might go right. Every time that fear got tripped, I picked you up and moved you away rather than facing the possibility of discomfort. How does Emily Henry know my inner thoughts? If you showed me this quote and told me that it came from my brain, like I would believe you. She must be a witch. That's the only explanation that I have for how she got inside my brain. New favorite author. This is something that happens at the end of every year. Despite the fact that I read so many books, I never feel like I've read that many books from like any one particular author. But in the last few months, I have read 4 books by the same author. And so I guess you would say that he's one of my favorite authors. That is none other than Riley Sager. In the last couple of months, I have read Final Girls, The House Across the Lake, The Last Time I Lied, and The Only One Left, all by Riley Sager. And I really enjoyed every single one of them. Now, I've mentioned it before in other videos, but if this is the first video that you are seeing of me, I am the type of person who just like cannot predict things that are happening in a book. I do not catch any sort of foreshadowing allusion to any future plot. I am always 100% taken aback by any sort of plot twist in a book. I feel like that makes me like the perfect target for a thriller novel because I am always surprised by the ending. And so keep that in mind when I tell you that I was always caught off guard by the ending of Riley Sager's novels. They kept me on the edge of my seat and they were also so atmospheric. I think my favorite one that I read by him this year was The Last Time I Lied. It takes place at a summer camp. The setting was just so immersive. I just really enjoyed it. Books that you are so glad you finally read. No other option than The Inheritance Games. I added the first book to my Goodreads want to read list in April of 2021 and I finally read it 3 years later. I had been talking about this series for so long as if I had already read it. I had kind of convinced myself without even reading the book that it was a 5 stars and therefore I was scared to read it in case it didn't live up to the expectations I had for it in my brain, but I finally read it and I think it surpassed my expectations for it, which was so fun. So I'm so glad I finally read these books. A book that you're glad you got off of your TBR. The book that had been on my TBR the longest before I read it this year was Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare. Now this is the first book in the prequel series to the Mortal Instruments series, which she is, I feel like, kind of the most well known for. This book was so irritating to read, which was so unfortunate because I was reading this book because it is one of my friend's absolute favorite books. It was literally the exact same book as the first book of the Mortal Instruments series. The exact same plot lines and so many details of the characters were exactly the same. And I didn't even like reading City of Bones in the first place. So imagine how I felt like essentially rereading City of Bones. Book that should be made into a TV show or a movie. I 100% think that Assistant to the Villain should be made into a TV show or a movie. If you haven't read this book, you definitely need to. Is it the most well-written book? No, but it is such a fun time and such a unique premise. It is a fantasy book, but it is written kind of in the way of a fairy tale. You have like the hero and then you have the villain. And the villain has an office building and employees and an HR manager. And I don't know why, but that image to me is just so enjoyable. And I think an adaptation of this book would be hilarious. Which book is your happy place book? I feel like my answer for this question doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I decided that it was Say You Swear by Megan Brandy. Now, if you've read Say You Swear, you're probably really laughing about it now because you know that this book isn't really happy. It's actually just like 600 pages worth of pain. People have said it time and time again, and I do believe it. This book reads a lot like a Wattpad book. And for about 7 years, I read nothing but Wattpad books. I would spend countless hours a week reading books exactly like this one on Wattpad. Reading it feels very nostalgic to me, even though my memories of reading Wattpad, they were never happy. Let's be honest. I feel like you can only be happy when you're feeling nostalgic. And this book evokes nostalgia in me. And therefore, I decided it was my happy place book. But also, Noah Riley is the ultimate book boyfriend. Like my favorite book boyfriend. I read this year 100%. Most tailor-coded book. I definitely have to say The Do-Over. Miss Lynn Painter was 100% listening to a Taylor Swift playlist on repeat while she was reading this book because the amount of Taylor Swift references I caught in this book was 5, and I definitely think that there had to have been more in this book. If I had to pick a Taylor album to describe this book, I would definitely say Lover. Specifically, I Forgot That You Existed. Hi, I'm so funny. Unpopular book you loved. When I say unpopular in this context, do you think of book that people didn't like that you loved, or unpopular as in you don't really hear people talk about it? Because I don't know if I read any books that were really widely disliked that I enjoyed this year. So I'm gonna take it as like unpopular, that like people don't talk about it, and that is the River of Time series. Love that series. It's a 5-star series for me, and I never see anyone talk about it on social media. A popular book you didn't love. I've got to be honest, I did not like Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. I'm sorry, but I don't want to lie and say that I really enjoyed a book when I didn't. It was much more gory than I was anticipating, especially for a YA novel, and that just like threw me off. I think that aspect of it kind of like put me off for like actually enjoying the book. But I also didn't like the romance. Obviously, towards the end of the book, the characters would say that they had feelings for each other, but their actions like did not give that at all. If your actions say that you hate each other, why would I believe you when you say that you are in love? Do you think I'm a fool? Like, what? The highest and lowest rated books on Goodreads with a 4.71 stars from 4,713 ratings. The highest rated book that I read this year was The Asheville Christmas Wedding, the third book in the Carolina Christmas series by Hope Holloway and Cecilia Scott. That to me is funny that that is the book that's rated the highest. I rated it a 3 stars. It wasn't bad, but it also wasn't groundbreaking. I feel like I tend to rate fantasy books higher than romance books usually because I feel like I am more likely to experience something earth-shattering and groundbreaking when I read a fantasy novel than I do reading a romance book. With 12,546 ratings and an average of a 3.28 stars, the lowest rated book that I read this year was Argyle by Ellie Conway. I rated it a 3.5 stars. That is too high. I do not endorse January Jess's rating because that is simply too high. Favorite audiobook. I really don't listen to audiobooks that much. I just have a really hard time paying attention, and then I feel like I don't enjoy the book. And then when I do listen to audiobooks, I feel like I don't enjoy the book as much as I could have if I had read the book, and then I feel bad. But I do have an audiobook that I really enjoy, and I actually have listened to it 3 times, and that is Run Rose Run by Dolly Parton and James Patterson. It is just a fun book. I can listen to it forever. I love the story, and it is so fun because Kelsey Ballerini and Dolly Parton actually narrate some of the characters in the book, and I love them. And so it's just fun to listen to that book. A new annual reread. Definitely The Inheritance Games or Funny Story. I'm actually kind of itching to reread both of those books. Ooh, maybe actually Carrie Said It Was Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I really enjoyed that book, and I kind of like forget about it sometimes, but then I remember it and I'm like, I actually really enjoyed that book. Now that I think about it, June was a really good reading month for me. So I read all 5 of those books in June. Take me back to June, please. Oh my gosh. New comfort book. Now this isn't a new comfort book. It is a book that I've read before, but that's Life Just Got Real by Sadie Robertson. I think I have read that book no less than 5 times. That sounds really excessive, but it is true. And I will read it again. Goodreads reading goal reflection. At the beginning of this year, I set my Goodreads reading goal to 50 books. Last year I read 70 books, but going into this year, I knew a lot was going to be happening in my life. I was in my last semester of college. I was going to be moving, finding a job, potentially starting a new job. A lot was gonna happen this year. A lot did happen, but I didn't want to set my Goodreads goal too high because I am 100% the type of person to where if it got to November and I was behind on my reading goal, I was going to be stressing, like trying to read more books to hit the reading goal and like neglecting my responsibilities to read. So I put it at 50 books because that is less than the amount that I read last year, and so if things get super busy, I definitely thought I could read 50 books this year, regardless of what I was doing. As of today, which I'm filming this on the 15th, there are 2 weeks left in December. I have read 108 books. Oops, I definitely hit my goal. I actually doubled my goal. Definitely didn't think I was gonna be reading that much this year, but I had a lot of fun doing it. Not yet sure what I'm gonna make my 2025 reading goal yet though. This video was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun planning it. I always enjoy like looking back and reflecting and seeing what things I've enjoyed throughout the year. But I hope you guys will stick around in 2025 to see what I read and get some inspo for your TBR. But that is all I have for you guys today. If you enjoyed this book, please give it a thumbs up to let me know that you enjoy this type of content. Comment down below the best and worst book that you read in 2024. And subscribe to my channel for more bookish content in the future. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day and I will see you guys next time. Bye.